Leave me alone. I can look after myself. How often we have heard that said, and how often when we have said it ourselves, not only when we're young, but at all ages. And if we haven't said it, we have meant it. We've been polite about it, but we really meant, leave me alone and don't interfere with me. I can look after myself. None of us likes to be interfered with. And the subject that I want you to think with me tonight about is just interference and intervention in our lives. We resent intervention. We resent interference. And it's quite right in many ways that we should resent it. We resent it when we're young. I've mentioned that already. And sometimes, this no doubt will be discussed in focus afterwards, and sometimes parents, in the name of love, can interfere too much and be over-possessive. They won't let the person breathe. I came across an amusing little sort of prayer of the possessive parent some years ago. I couldn't turn it up again, but you may remember it. I quoted it some years ago. The over-possessive mother prays, "Dear God, may darling Charlie grow up in the way I want him to. May he tell me everything. May he have no secrets from me. May he always be grateful for what I do for him. May he be dependent upon me always. May he ask my opinions about all his future decisions. And if he must have a girl, may it be that sweet little Cynthia Smith." This is interference. This is a takeover bid. And I like it when a man called Gibran says about their children, "You may give them your love, but not your thoughts. For they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams." We cannot and we should not take over people's lives. And I notice that when the rich young ruler came to Jesus and got the great offer of being his disciple, someone says this was the 13th disciple who turned it down. The invitation given to the rich young ruler was the same as given to Simon and John and Andrew. "Go and sell all that you have and come take up your cross and follow me." And he went away sorrowing because he had great possessions. And Jesus had to let him go. He couldn't interfere with him. And all that's in me and all that's in you, I'm sure, says, this is right. Don't interfere. But wait a minute. Just wait a minute. Before we just settle for that, and there's something in me and in you that wants to settle for that, let's take a second look at this business of interference. It came to me when I was reading the first chapter of Romans. There were people there who are described as in a very bad state of depravity. They've reached the bottom of impurity and all kinds of unnatural sexual practice and mental corruption. Envy and murder and deceit and gossip and slander and ruthlessness and heartlessness. Now listen. Paul says God judged these people, and this was the punishment. He left them alone. 3 times in this chapter. Verse 24, therefore God gave them up to the lusts of their heart, to impurity. Verse 26, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. Verse 28, God gave them up to a base mind and to improper conduct. Their condemnation was that God didn't interfere with them. They were past his interference. And so I have to look at this business again. And I have to think, do I really want to be allowed to stew in my own juice, so to speak? Do I really want to be abandoned? Do I really want a policy of non-interference from God and from everybody else? It's not the gospel. The gospel is not God so loved the world that he left it alone. God so loved the world that he didn't intervene. And another small incident comes to my mind. That day when Peter realized, had a glimpse of the purity of Christ. Peter was so overcome, as we would all be, that he dropped to his knees, this big fisherman, and blurted out to Jesus, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O God. Leave me alone, Christ, I'm so impure." If Christ had answered that prayer, Peter couldn't have been saved. "Please, Jesus, don't interfere with me." So if we are going to take a second look at this business of interference, it seems to me we've got to go back to the psalmist, the psalm we've just finished singing, where the psalm says, the psalmist says, "Do not thou forget me," and he says, he doesn't say, "Depart from me." Psalm 13, and he says, "Do not thou forsake me. Do not thou forsake me. Don't give me up. Please interfere with me. Don't go away." And Paul takes this up himself, and I don't know about you, but he certainly speaks for me when he examines the struggle within his own soul in that wonderful chapter of Romans chapter 7. And he says, in the agony of wanting to be good, "The good that I would, I do not. The evil that I would not, that I do. The things that I want to do, the things that I don't want to do, I find myself doing." And then he develops it, the theme, and J.B. Phillips, it goes on to say, "Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from the clutches of my own sinful nature?" And here's the answer, and it's the gospel breaking through. I thank God there is a way out through Jesus Christ, my Lord. Somebody who's prepared to come into my life and deliver me, if I allow him, from self-centeredness and temper and selfishness and obsession with getting my own way. The plain truth is that there is no hope for us if God leaves us alone. There is no possibility of salvation if we are left to ourselves. This is not to say that when God moves and takes the initiative and moves towards us, that he deprives us of the dignity of our free will. This is not to say that there's a takeover bid and the invading of the privacy of our own judgment. This is not to say that he breaks down our inner personality. But there is some measure of the gospel of change which we have to learn. And that is that we have to allow him to change us. And unless we allow him to redeem us in that way, there is no possibility of salvation. And we really are on our own. Now, when I think of interference, and when I think of the resentment that we all have to interference and intervention in our lives, I remember that there is one exception. And the key that opens the door is love. Love. Real love. If we know that somebody, a parent or a friend, really cares about us, we're more ready to accept their interference. In 1 John, he rebukes his disciples, some of his disciples. 1 John, and he says, and he begins it in a loving way. He doesn't say, keep away from idols. Keep away from idols. He says, little children. This is a diminutive, a loving phrase. Little children, guard yourself from idols. This is loving interference. This is loving advice from someone who loves them and cares for them. This is fatherly concern, not from somebody who wants to take them over, but who somebody with real love, who wants for them their highest and their best and most complete good. And they are more ready to accept it when it comes in the language of love. Love opens doors. And I go back to the text, God so loved the world that he couldn't leave it alone. O love that wilt not let me go. I had a teacher who used to say, God's love is a love that will never let us go, and never let us down, and never let us off. Never let us off. That's indulgence. That's non-interference, which is not a good thing. And the poet Francis Thompson portrays this in a long poem which I have no intention of reading, when he talks about love, the love of God as the hound of heaven. The hound of heaven. I fled him. I fled away from him down the nights and down the days. I fled him down the arches of the years. I fled him down the labyrinthine ways of my own mind. And in the midst of tears I hid from him, and under running laughter. And he describes, but with unhurrying chase, and unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, majestic instancy, they beat, and a voice beat more instant than the feet. All things betray thee who betrayest me. And he goes on through the poem. The hound of heaven pursues him and keeps on relentlessly and remorselessly going after him until at the very end it gets him. Halts by me that footfall. Is my gloom after all shade of his hand, outstretched caressingly? O fondest, blindest, weakest, I am he whom thou seekest. You drove away love from thee, who drove away me. Yes, there's there's a tendency in all of us to say, leave me alone. Leave me alone and I'll be all right. I can look after myself. This may be all right when we're learning to walk. This may be all right in our kindergarten stage. It may be all right in our adolescence. But when we become maturer people, we want help. We, please God, are a bit more open to loving, kindly advice, loving, kindly interference. And most of all, we are open to submission to the love and interference of Christ. I can't help retelling again a story that I've told before and means something to me about the Salvation Army girl going after the drunk, the man who was stocious, stinking, vomiting drunk. And she followed him down the street and he fell. And she went to pick him up and he pushed her off and he was sick. And pulling himself up again, he lurched forward and fell again, and again she went to him to pick him up and he shoved her away. And the third time it happened and he turned on her and he snarled at her, "For Christ's sake, leave me alone." And looking at him with love and compassion and care, she said to him, "For Christ's sake, I can't."